to me, what it's sounding like is a lot of these people that you're working with, and I guess a lot of people in the world who have to go through this transition, arrive in their golden years, and then they go, well, shit, this is initially not what I thought to get, and then they've got to do this sort of work that no one's talking about to get to the other side.
Purpose is never dead, and neither is the work that it takes to actually get there. It's just that we have been conditioned to believe that you make all your money at the beginning of your life and you deal with things at the end of your life in this golden year kind of thing, but you don't really deal with the real issues.
Welcome to the Bountiful Podcast. I'm Shan, and this is a space for curious, thoughtful conversations about what it really means to live a bountiful life. In a world that often rewards more, faster, and louder, Bountiful exists to slow things down, to explore joy, resilience, creativity, and the small choices that shape how we live every day. Each episode is a conversation with someone who's thought deeply about life, work, health, money, relationships, or purpose, and what they've learned along the way. If you're looking for ideas you can actually live with, you're in the right place. Retirement is often sold as freedom, but what happens when it feels less like freedom and more like loss, or even being lost? In this episode, I'm joined by Klay Williams, founder of the Just Beginning Project, to explore the identity shift no one really prepares you for. We talk about why financial planning isn't enough, how unhealed patterns can resurface in later life, and practical tools for redefining purpose, community, and self-worth in your second act. If you're approaching retirement or already in it, this conversation is one that truly matters.
Hey, welcome to the Bountiful Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Welcome to New York.
Thank you. Always in a heat wave.
Literally just out of one.
So excited to be talking to you. I guess we're both really passionate about the area and the topic that we're going to talk about today. Meaning, midlife, living fully. They call it retirement, you call it rebirth. So can you tell me a little bit about your background and upbringing?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, by way of Kalamazoo, and then by way of Princeton Seminary. I had a calling that really began when I was on study abroad in undergrad. And it introduced me to working with people from all over the world who were trying to figure out their life and purpose. That yielded itself to me going to Princeton Theological Seminary to study theology, obtain a Master of Divinity degree while working at Ralph Lauren at the exact same time. I had a lot of great ministerial experiences at Ralph Lauren, not so much at Princeton Theological Seminary. I got the education, the academics to back up what I do through a lens of pastoral counseling. And I got the life experience of dealing with everyday people through the Ralph Lauren experience. I juxtaposed those two things together, moved to New York, $500, and started a purpose and wellness company. And that's how I landed to where I am today.
So what does it mean to you to live a bountiful life?
Live a bountiful life. I say to be spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically thriving on your own unique terms.
And what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Calm down and patience. Calm down. I'm such a thriver, an overachiever, a go kind of person. And I have spent a lot of my time just in that just ebb and flow of life. I definitely would tell them, calm down.
These two questions, they're hard, but I think they're sort of the crux of what we're really doing here today. How do we have a bountiful retirement?
Great question. How do we have a bountiful retirement? I think defining on your own unique terms what you want that next chapter of life to be. So many people who are trying to figure out what a complete and fulfilled retirement is usually off of someone else's expectations, someone else's desires, someone else's playbook. And people don't really take that time to dissect what is your personal playbook for what you want for your life. So I think that's a good way to start.
What does it take emotionally, psychologically, spiritually to thrive in the second act of life beyond the finances?
That's a great question. I think you have to start at the beginning before you go to the end. And what I mean by that is a lot of the people that we're seeing through the Just Beginning Project in general, they come and they say, this is what we want our retirement to look like. This is what is going to bring me fulfillment. This is what we're so passionate and so excited about. Without the coaching, they'll then start that process and they'll come back. We weren't fulfilled at all, but this is what we planned our whole entire life for. And so what we end up doing is skipping the step of, what are any residue or things from our past that we need to clear up and clean up for ourselves? There are a lot of things, especially people who are older adults, baby boomers specifically, have not dealt with in their childhood that informed their careers, their partners, where they're living, their hobbies, their identity, what it is that they want to do for themselves. And so it's hard to put yourself in the driver's seat of your life and your career and your vocation at this particular point in time if you haven't gone back to close the gap between your past and your present to be fully healed and whole within yourself. Because we meet so many different life movements with transitions, but not closure. And that's a really big piece to deal with the emotional, the mental well-being, and the spiritual. If we can start there, we can get to a greater sense of fulfillment beyond the finances.
Powerful. So let's kind of start at your beginning. So you became a coach, and you coached it like, you did the dream coaching, right? Coaching executives at like Google and Airbnb. Was there a defining moment that drew you into the working with older adults and shifting your entire business to, work with older adults?
Two defining moments that did not happen within the last few years. When I first started out, I had a really great opportunity. I was coaching with Dress for Success Worldwide, their Going Places network, and the Walmart Foundation sponsored the grant that gave them the money for this. And you always had to have an outside facilitator be in charge of the 8 to 10 week cohort. You would partner with a corporate social responsibility firm, and at this particular juncture, it was BlackRock. And we went through the whole 10-week process. And at the graduation, they had this woman who was amazing. I mean, she was just incredible. She walked in the room, commanded the space, and she was our speaker. She was, I think, one of the first managing directors in that particular time. And she was just so beloved. After our graduation, we connected. I told her a little bit about what I did and moved on. She sent me a message. And she wanted to talk to me about next stage, next life things. We met at a cafe, actually not too far from here. And here it is. At that particular point, I think I was in my late 20s, maybe early 30s, and she's clearly much older than me. And she wanted to talk to me about what was next. She hadn't told anybody at her firm that she wanted to leave being a managing director at such a huge asset management company. And I was one of the first people that she wanted to talk to about. And she's this esteemed person. I'm like, wait a minute, what do I have to offer? She's 30 years older than me, right? So that was one of the first key points. And then at the height of the pandemic, I was coaching at Airbnb. And this was right at literally New York was getting ready to close down. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, older adults started to send me messages, send me notes, or a friend would say, can you talk to my mom? An older adult would say, can you talk to my best friend? I know I have a colleague. And I'm like, wait a minute. And it harkened back to this managing director moment. And so many things started to line up in my life that kind of let me know this is where you need to go to next. And so I followed that voice.
Good on you for following the voice. A lot of people wouldn't have listened.
Yeah, I've kind of have had this rebellious life of following this voice.
So during the pandemic, you talking about, you noticed the rise in older adults sort of asking what now? What do you think they were really searching for? Connection.
Remember, we really didn't start talking about the epidemic of loneliness globally until the pandemic really happened. People would have hush-hush conversations, of course, AARP and other organizations of that note would have these larger topics, but it did not become a thing. And I think the height of the pandemic drew people in to say, I'm missing connection because we were all locked in. People were seeking fulfillment, seeking to live outside of a cookie cutter life. Because remember, at the top of the pandemic, people are wondering, with all the millions and millions of people who died, am I next? And so it kind of confronts you with not only your mortality, but also the decisions and choices that have led up to where you are right now. And so it was a soul searching, I think, that really led a lot of folks to me and me to them.
Can you tell me about the project and why you called it Just Beginning?
Okay, so when I am writing, I remove like the cacophony of other voices. I'm by myself. I don't need to have that group of people. I really just need to commune and connect with me, God, the Spirit that lives within. And I wrote out the treatment for it, ran it by a original contributor to it. And he was like, just think about it, just think on it. And then that night, I had the dream of all dreams that gave me the confirmation. My grandparents, who both are deceased, came to me in this dream. I am driving, and in my dream, I'm driving to their car in an older, make model. I don't remember what the make was, but in Detroit. And everything is AI. It's like airbrushed to perfection. And even like the street curb, they had a white paint fixture that would have the address. It was very synonymous with living in Detroit, a thing to help the postal service locate your address quicker. And so they had their address, 15 whatever, Wickham. And I pull in, I'm like, what am I doing at Grandma and Grandpa's house? I knock on the door and ring the doorbell, and I open it, and my grandfather is there, except for he looks wonderful, just AI, airbrushed. But he still is in a wheelchair. Even though he could walk, he would always be in a wheelchair, cooking and attending things around the house. And he said, Klay, come in. So I come in the house. I said, Grandpa, I give him a big hug. He goes, what are you doing? I'm so glad you came here. How are you? I'm like, I'm great. I'm doing well. And then I hear my grandmother in the living room, and she's taking like a potluck kind of thing. She has the mitten warmers. She's in like an apron, and she looks like my grandmother, but just younger, and again, airbrush. And she sits the pot on the table, and she goes, oh, Jack, my grandpa, leave Klay alone. Oh, come here, Klay. Come here, darling. And darling was her word. So I give her a big hug. I'm like, Grandma, oh my gosh, what are you both doing here? Sit down. We're so happy to see you. I'm like, how are you? How's life? They're like, we're doing so good. Don't we look good? I said, you do. And my grandma goes, okay, well, you have to go. I'm so glad you came to visit us, but I left something for you in the credenza. Whenever I would come back from college, they would always have an envelope with my name on it, and it typically was money in the envelope. And I said, Grandma, no, I don't need your money now. Like, it's fine. She goes, no. Open the envelope. And so I open the envelope, and it's money. And I look at my grandma, and I say, thank you, Grandma, so much. Thank you, Grandpa. And then the money started rotating in the envelope. And she said, we're just so proud of you. We know that you're just beginning. This was the title that I had wrote down in the treatment. And then she said that. The dream ended, and I woke up. And I knew that was the title for the project.
For those people that sort of aren't aware, so the treatment you're talking about is like the sort of pre-documentary thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So originally it started as just a docuseries. We wanted to support older adults, specifically baby boomer population, in reimagining what retirement could look like for them. In these conversations that we were having at the height of the pandemic, no one really felt there was a place or a space that they could go to talk about healing themselves from the past and what reinvention on their own terms would look like. And so I knew I wanted to create a docuseries pilot to reflect that kind of experience, following 2 protagonists or 3 through their life with getting the coaching from me, and also the natural, matriculation, what happens when you have these break-in and breakthrough moments, and how the work of Just Beginning could support them in their lives. And so from the docuseries, we created a trainer-trainer program, the Just Beginning dinner circles for community engagement. And the training program is a peer-to-peer coaching model, so that what you see in the documentary, we've trained other older adults to now be the coaches to train their peers on what their new life could be.
So that kind of is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk to you, is like all of these big things that come up, like the emotions, your place in the world, like not mattering anymore and needing to figure out how you matter, like having a sense of purpose. Can we talk about all of those things?
Yeah, sure. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Maybe we should talk first about like what people get wrong about retirement and then what they get right.
Our coaching experience, I think the right part, typically for the baby boomer population, we'll say, is saving for retirement. That tends to not be a huge conversation. What has been sort of an undercurrent that's starting to creep up a little bit is, whoa, I did not expect to live this long. The new longevity movement that's happening where people are living longer. So that sort of is right up underneath there. What people tend to not get right is the assumption that who they were in their traditional day job and their traditional career is who they will end up becoming, and that same sense of feeling in their retirement. When we were doing field education to do a lot of research, it was man on the street kind of conversations. One lady said, you cannot interview me, but I'll give you this information. Huge job. She was one of the cosmetic companies in North America. And she said to me, I never thought about this until my husband said this to me in a conversation. They were headed to a cocktail party, and she was still in her title in that huge position. And he said to her, who are you going to be after you leave this? And she goes, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're no longer going to be so-and-so, the so-and-so title. You're not going to have that anymore. And she goes, no, I will. And he goes, no, people aren't going to be calling you. People are not going to be giving you the same quote unquote respect and all those things. Of course, your true friends and people who are real community will, but the identification of who you have been and the power that you have carried, you're not going to have that any longer. And she said that was the first time that she actually considered that. And it wasn't until she was just fresh into her retirement, a few months, and when I talked to her during the man on the street conversation, she said, for the first time in my life, in nearly 40 years, just 2 months out of my traditional job, I feel like I don't even matter anymore. And so many people say, who am I when I'm no longer in the game? When I'm no longer the master chess player? How do I find a sense of mattering and purpose? People don't think about that and the identification factors that will shift and change after.
So how do you help people find their new identity?
Yeah, it's our first exercise called the identity reshuffle exercise. And there's 4 categories that we work from: personal identity, professional identity, societal identity, and generational identity. All 4 of those subcategories have different sort of statures and different ways of being that people don't even think about. In your personal life, while you were in your traditional job, what was the identity you had in your traditional kind of conversations and relationships? In your professional identity, case in point, the example that I just gave, what were the identification factors that supported you and created who you were? Societal, baby boomers or older adults, you're not supposed to do this because society says that's not who you are. And then that generational piece, which is really important. The silent generation, and a lot of times, and I say this respectfully, but because they did not talk about a lot of stuff, they birth a generation, not holistically, but for a lot of what we're seeing, an unhealed generation. What does that mean when you are a baby boomer from that generation and your parent was from the silent generation? What characteristics were passed on to you unconsciously that was never yours to begin with and never yours to have, but it's potentially governed who you are for your whole entire life? So those are 4 major identification factors that we work through, but there's so many subcategories that are specific to each person. So we work through all those different things. And in the exercise, we always ask them, what do you want to leave behind? And think of it as a bridge on the other side of that. What is it that you want to walk towards? What does that now look like for you? Because that, as a coach, tells me this is what we have to close the gap between your past and present here, is creating a new bridge and a new pathway.
Do you have some examples that fit into each category, just so that people, if they're listening and they want to do a mini version of this for themselves, they can sort of start identifying what sort of things might go in each category?
Great question. So let's talk about personal identity. And this is before you retired or you're in retirement. You are the person that always picked up the tab because you had the high profile job. You were the person that always managed the get-togethers. Maybe now you want to manage the get-togethers just for yourself. And so your identity in that particular point is always being in charge. Your friends have saw you as that. You now have to unlearn that behavior and then train your relationships on who you are at this particular point in time. Professional identity, you were somebody who had the corner office, or you were the manager. You were somebody who had a full team, and in that team was community. You saw them every single solitary day. Everybody reported to you. You had all these different things that you were in charge of. Now the question may be, as you're in retirement, where do you now plan to have that camaraderie and that community? And then also, too, how do you transition from that profession into now a vocation so you have meaning and purpose and the community? Societal identification factors. Society will say to you at 80 years old, no, you can't go ahead and write that book. You can't start that podcast. And if you're someone, for example, who have had a wealth of experience and you want to talk about leadership development and you say, I'm no longer a player in the game, what is that new identification factor is? I'm going to now switch from the societal expectations and then go into what I want to do in terms of like a podcast, for example. Generational identity. Now, this is where we're looking at some of that unlearning and that healing that needs to take place. There was a particular person in the field interview. He was independently wealthy, and so was his father. All he wanted in his retirement was to have a relationship with his dad because his dad, silent generation, did not give him love and affirmation. And he wanted to have that when he retired. And he said to me, here it is, I have all the money I could ever want. And he has all the money he could ever want. He's in his 90s. And what I want more than anything else is for my dad to tell me that he loves me before he dies. And so even in that particular instance, what does it look like from a generational factor, from the identification piece, to release the ego, to be vulnerable, to have that conversation with your dad, to have that conversation with a loved one, to even say to them, this is what I need from you right now. Can you support that? This is what I've been feeling. This is the hurt I've been carrying. This is the joys that I need to express with you. Can you support me in hearing that?
That just sounds like that last one in particular. It all sounds quite hard, but like that last one in particular, like a big sort of generalization, but of that generation as being that you have a whole generation that was pretty much never told that they were loved.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine going through life until you're like 70, not hearing that, feeling that, deeply knowing that at a familial level, like you might have had like, you know, partners or husbands or children, so you might have learned that from them. But like having the courage when you never have had that conversation, to have that conversation much later in life, like I kind of can't imagine.
Yeah. And that's why the work is so important, because we're asking people to peel back so many layers of themselves to grow up that little boy, a little girl, little person, if that's the language they choose to utilize, so that the age that they are, 70, that person can reach that. When we're working with people, a lot of times I'll say, where do you feel you are emotionally right now? And they'll say, 14.
Wow.
They'll say 20. But what we're seeing is at age 9, something had happened in that person's life, male, female, non-gender specific, that shifted and changed the trajectory in where they would go in their life and what would happen in their familial understandings. And across the board, whether I have been coaching older adults or traditional midlife individuals, it is something around that 9, 10 years old that could shift the trajectory of one's life. So we're going back and saying, all right, now we're in maybe week 4 of the process. He's about 35 years old. Oh, she's about 40 now. So that we can get to the age that they are in maturity, emotionally, spiritually, and from a mental well-being standpoint.
So after identity, what comes next in the process for you?
Yeah. So we're looking at the ring of fluidity. It's a behavior change tool to help people understand what are the things that come easy for them. Like we're talking about just like natural skills that you're just really great at. These are just very, 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 very great and easy for you. And then what are some of your growth edges? And I don't like to use the word weaknesses because some people get stuck in that. So we'll say growth edge, things that you know come difficult for you. And in the middle, we call it the median. And in all my years of coaching, the median is literally things that aren't necessarily easy and things that aren't necessarily a growth edge for you. This is the nuance of life, the gray area that most human beings do not like to exist in, either as black or white. We list out all of the different areas in those circles. And the results of this exercise is for most people, when stressors come in their life, transitions happen like retirement or huge, huge, huge things, people tend to react out of the growth edge rather than the things that come easy and natural for them. And in the middle is where we always typically are, the gray area. That is where you are in life right now. And so I help retrain not only the brain and the behavior on how do we focus on the things that come easy for you and how do you utilize your natural gifts and strengths to support the things that are in your growth edge. And so while we're working on all that through these several weeks, we start to notice by focusing on what comes easy with us to combat the growth edge starts to go to the median words. Words in your median start to go into your easy circle by reprogramming your mentality and your behavior to work with what comes easy for you instead of working what comes against you. You also get a chance to see what your triggers are. And especially if you're transitioning, it gives you a much clearer understanding of not only who you are, but where you want to go with newer clarity than what you had before.
One of the stories that came up when you were doing this exercise with one of your, I don't want to call it a subject, but one of your protagonists was like compassion and kindness was a strength, but not to themselves.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Sandra Balo, Sandy, AKA one of our protagonists, she had self-forgiveness as one of her growth edge. And so I was asking her, what is something that you know that comes difficult for you, something that you know you really need to work on? And she had forgiving myself. I can forgive other people easily, but it's forgiving myself. And then I asked her, what is one word from the easy circle that you have right here that you could utilize to support you in working through that self-forgiveness? And she was like, compassion, giving myself compassion. And that was a huge river flow of tears and emotion. And that's what typically happens when people are like, I've been going all my life and I never knew that I could give this to myself. And it was there right in front of me all this time.
How do you identify people's triggers?
One thing that is a sure enough giveaway, and I think a lot of people discount this in themselves, what is it that you're feeling in your body when something is uncomfortable for you or you're responding in a way that's very reactive? The mind-body connection, especially in coaching and this work with older adults, it has been like the life-changing, like valve of wonderfulness, because I can see when someone shifts in their body, the way they catch a breath, when they have thought to themselves, oh, I'm being reactive here. I'm being very reactive, but not wanting to admit that. And so the body knows and the body remembers. And so I would always tell people, get in your body and pay attention to how you are reactive and how your body responds to that.
Really interesting. I think this particular generation have been told to, or forced to, or whatever the word is, to like suppress a lot of stuff. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. Really great story from the actual pilot. Sharon said, I have met a lot of transitions in my life and they have been met with closure because I was just trying to go and go and go and go. And I said to myself, when I retire at 70, I'm finally going to deal with it. Imagine literally your whole entire life of just going and going and going and never even having the opportunity or even thinking that I can stop right now and process and deal with this. But because of the patterns and pathologies of what they've been taught, you suck it up and you just keep on going. And there's a time and there's a designated age and area, quote unquote retirement, where you can deal with it, not really deal with it, but where you can address some of these different things.
But it's meant to be your golden years, not the time to be dealing with all your stuff. So, I mean, to me, what it's sounding like is a lot of these people that you're working with, and I guess a lot of people in the world who have to go through this transition, arrive in their golden years, and then they go, well, shit, this is initially not what I thought to get, and then they've got to do this sort of work that no one's talking about to get to the other side.
Purpose is never dead, and neither is the work that it takes to actually get there. It's just that we have been conditioned to believe that you make all your money at the beginning of your life and you deal with things at the end of your life in this golden year kind of thing, but you don't really deal with the real issues. When I first started this work and was doing so much research and looking at all the different books that were out there on retirement, all of the advice was to go and find your guru in India, go to Bali at this particular point and just, and enjoy gardening, the kids and travel and all those things like that. But no one begins the conversation, to your point. Why can't we talk about profit and purpose at the very beginning of our life so that we don't have to deal with a lot of this as we get older? And so I think if we reposition and reframe golden years, in order to get to the golden parts, the golden nuggets of yourself, because purpose is never dead, it's a continuing learning process. And if we invite people to be lifelong learners, the learning could be as golden as what is typically, deemed as this wonderful time in your life. How great would it be to be working on your healing, and maybe you didn't get it in your 50s or 40s, but you have this beautiful window of chapter of your life. And not only do you get to have this healing experience, you get to bring all this wisdom and knowledge that you have, right? And so if we reframe it, not just as this time of sitting in the sun and you never have to learn anything else, but being lifelong learners and bringing all chapters of your life together, let's do some healing work and let's then reinvent who you want to be at this particular point in time. It doesn't have to be a negative thing.
Yeah.
It can be a liberating thing.
My dad died when I was 18, and I learned a lot from that experience. I think the main thing was that there's no guarantee for tomorrow, and you never know who's going to be around. And so I sort of vowed to myself that I would just live life full force every day, and that I kind of didn't really, my views of what retirement meant to me changed a lot. And what I mean by that is I sort of I'm not going to wait until retirement to live the life that I want to live, because you might not get there. My dad didn't get there. And so then with that has come all of the healing, all of the stuff to be congruent with the person I am today as we are today. Unfortunately, though, that's not most people. And I think even looking at my mum and her generation, and a lot of the Bountiful podcast listeners, actually, they are going through these transitions now. And so I think it's really important to be having these conversations so they can live the life that they want, including all of the nuances and the messy stuff that you just haven't come across yet, which is all of this identity, purpose. What's my role in the world now? What am I going to spend time on? Who do I want to spend time with?
Yeah. Sean, to that exact point, I cannot tell you, after we had our first screening at DCTV here in New York, so many young men and women went up to Sandy and Sharon, myself and the director, and they said, I'm going home to call my mother. I'm going home to call my father. And then the audience kept saying to us, and these are Gen X, millennials, can you bring the age down? Can you not just focus on the baby boomers? We all have these things. It's a multi-generational conversation, and I don't think it's just been phrased as that, because for the first time, I believe Just Beginning is a category creator in terms of dealing with baby boomers as the center of the conversation and not someone in the background. And so that's one of the main reasons too why I wanted to start with this demographic. What could it be like to start with the top of the chain? Yes, silent generation is still alive, but the baby boomer generation really, I believe, hold the keys to healing not only their generation, but the other generations to follow. And really quickly, when Sandy's family came, her grandson was in the audience. And I sat in the final row, me and the director, Jesus Cardenas, and we kept looking at him throughout the conversation, just looking up, looking at his grandmother, because he never heard her story before.
Wow.
But imagine what those conversations has been like. And I'm still in conversation clearly with Sandy. She's one of our trainers for our Train the Trainer program now. But to see the domino effect of what this work has done, not only for her, but her family and her grandchildren. Imagine what that could do worldwide.
One of my favorite sayings is that we can all be a small stone thrown in a pond and have those ripple effects. So I would love to talk a little bit about purpose. And I know that this really does show up in a lot of areas in life. I mean, I feel like you were very lucky to find your calling. A lot of people don't have that.
Yeah.
So for people hungry to figure out their purpose in the second act of life, where do you think they should start?
By asking. There are so many people who forget how to petition not just themselves, but also a higher power. There is an energy, a life force, a spirit that is living inside of us. And so many people walk around and just not in communication with that. And so it may sound a little woo-woo, but literally asking, what am I here to do? Can you show me what am I here to do? And then a very practical tool and exercise that we do all the time is, let's look at childhood. What were you interested in? What were things that brought you passion, excitement, fulfillment when you were a little younger? And when we start going through that, a lot of people are like, oh, wait a minute, I forgot about this. I'm just asking them a question. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Oh, when I was in high school, oh my God, I used to be a wonderful writer. I don't write anymore because I didn't need it in my investment banking job. There are always clues that happen when we go back and comb through our past. And when a lot of times our older adults, when we get older in general, we forget about what those clues were because we haven't been engaging in play, in laughter, in petitioning, and asking ourselves some of those questions.
What is the downside of not having a purpose, have you found?
Isolation, loneliness, and physically decaying younger. It has been something that just caught my eye at what has happened when you see someone who comes to you in these conversations and they have not engaged in purpose, what physically happens to them by not having something that calls them, that supports them, something to live for.
In your experience, is a lot of this purpose in contributing to others, or does it really depend person to person?
That's a really great question. So there's two parts to that. And this may be counterintuitive to a lot of people, but before we're able to contribute to other people, I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we contribute to ourselves first? Because I get so many older adults in particular who say, but I volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club every week. And then I ask them, well, what do you feel about yourself doing all these different things? How do you serve yourself? How is your calling serving you? And I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't a part of the deal. It's about me being of service to everybody else. How do you contribute to yourself and be of service to you first with setting boundaries, with creating that self-love, that self-belief, that I am worthy just because I exist, not because I'm doing anything. And then allowing that purpose to flow inwardly outwardly to external contributions. That way, you're never feeling like I'm only worthy if I am doing this. I'm only great at life. I'm a good human being only if I am contributing to other people, because we end up losing ourselves in some of those contributions.
Where does play come into this? And I mean, not just for baby boomers and this generation going through a transition, play is so important, but also just can be so far away for a lot of people who are like, I must work, or I must contribute, or I must do all of this other stuff. So how have you reintroduced play into people's lives?
Yeah, by some of our excursions that we do. Sometimes people would say to me, why are we having a session at an apple orchard? They're like, wait a minute, why are we on a hayride during a conversation? And so I've always tried through our work is to have conversations in unconventional settings as the work goes on. Because what that play actually does, it opens people up to being a lot more vulnerable, a lot more grateful, and then it grounds and centers the conversation in a newer way. And that play has the ability, when things get really tough by doing a lot of this work, you have something to retreat, to go to, that reminds you of why you're even doing it in the first place.
My two things,
Yeah.
ball pits and high ropes courses. I know, right? I don't know.
It's
Just
your thing.
flow state, being up high, like when I was a kid, I used to climb trees.
Okay.
And so for me, a high ropes course, I'm just like flying through that thing. I'm not scared of heights. And joy. I think it's about what brings you joy.
That's good.
And how do you have more of it in your life, and giving yourself permission to feel the joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does playing so many roles over a lifetime make it harder to answer the question, who am I now?
Having roles happen without having closure around what the roles were there to teach you. So many times people just go from role to role to role to role, and they're thinking they're advancing without stopping to say, okay, here, 18 to 25, this was a fabulous role. 25 to 35, that was great. What did I need to learn from this role? What was it here to teach me? The next leg, oh, what was that here to teach me? And you're collecting all these lessons and learning capabilities so that when you are now at this particular point in time, you're not frazzled by these experiences. You know what they were there to capture and what it was there to offer you.
I think also in doing that, it sort of sounds like you're able to relinquish rather
Come on,
than
Sean.
like gripping onto it. You're like, oh, I see, I can relinquish this now.
Yeah. It no longer needs to be a part of my story, a part of my narrative, no longer a part of my identity.
Yeah, powerful. You have mentioned that people carry beliefs that aren't theirs, like Sharon, who said, I'm not a writer. Can you, how do you help people identify some of those stories and rewrite them? No pun intended.
All pun intended there. A lot of times we're looking at patterns and pathologies from mom and dad. And we have to approach this in a non-judgmental space. And what I tend to do, I'll say, what's your mom or dad first name? And they'll say maybe Gretchen. What did Gretchen, not your mom, what did Gretchen teach you about this? Because every time we use mom and dad, I have to respect them. It's disrespectful, especially for a baby boomer generation. And so, oh, this is so much helpful to me. Gretchen taught me, and then we're unloading and we're having this conversation so that it's not about mommy or daddy. Because even for the baby boomers, they regurgitate a lot of time to that younger 7, 8, 9-year-old person when they're talking about their parents. And it has to be in an affectionate way, because it was very disrespectful to talk in a ill regard for any of those people. And then also too, what happened in the household stayed in the household. So I helped them separate mommy from the woman, daddy from the father. And also it humanizes the parent.
Yeah.
So that you can see them not as your mom, but as a woman, a mother, or a person, just for inclusive language, going through whatever earthly experience they were going through. to help with that unlearning process.
What are some of the common beliefs you hear from people in this stage that might be holding them back?
I'm too old to do this. I'm too old to learn how this process works. This is just who I am. I don't have the support. I don't have the community.
Where does shame tend to show up in this process, and how can we begin to heal it?
Ooh, Sean.
Sorry.
Yeah, oh, wow. At the very, very beginning. What ends up happening after like the first few sessions in the process, no matter if you're working with me or going through the training program, life opens up. The skies are bright. It's just like, oh my gosh, I can do it, because life wants to support you. It really wants you to go on this particular path that, you really want to go on. And then resistance creeps in, and it's usually the name of shame. And shame has this ability to handicap people, not only to hold them back from their future, but also to clench down on the paradigm that we're trying to shift from the past. And so what we try to help people understand is that shame is here not to no longer be your guide, but to be the disruptor to help you learn the lesson that you really needed to learn. Use shame as a disruptor. Use shame as the axe that's going to chop the rope and no longer have that rope tethered to who you are. And so if you utilize it in a proactive way to work for you and not against you, it can be a liberating force rather than that negative, draining thing that just holds on to you.
Are there any other tools or techniques that you want to share with the Bountiful audience around how they can do some of this work? So we already have the identity exercise. We've done the ring of fluidity. Is there like one more?
Well, what I have realized throughout doing this work, we do not know how to ask for support and help when we're trying to figure out ways to transition, in our lives, and we don't know how to create boundaries during those transitionary phases. And so the 4 quadrants of support, it's 4 quadrants, clearly: me, personal, professional, and special to me. And in those 4 areas, how can you ask your community to be of support to you, especially during transition? And here's how you start. And this language is so, so great. This is what I need. Is that something you can support? There's no ambiguity. You're gonna get a clear answer of yes or no. And what we have found, especially people are transitioning, they need help doing certain things because they're no longer the person that they were before. And so with that me part, so when you set a boundary with ourselves first, and what are the ways that I need to support myself for myself before I begin to start asking other people about boundaries? A really great example could be if I know that I have a hard time initiating conversation. The boundary that I'm going to set with myself is being very clear that at 5 o'clock today, I'm going to ask so-and-so for that. And boundaries are, in my definition, expressing all the things that you want by limiting the things that you don't want to have. People think of boundaries as a blockade. No, boundaries are all about expansion and expanding what you do want by limiting the things that you don't want. And in your personal life, when we talk about asking for support and then setting boundaries with people, this is what I need. Is that something you can support? I need you to show up when you say you're going to show up. Can you support that? I need you to fulfill this contractual agreement. Is that something you can support? In your vocational life, I need not to do your work and mine at this particular point in time. Is that something you can support? And so the 4 quadrants of support is really great with being able to ask in a clear, concise way what you need, and you get a clear answer. Is it yes or no?
Yeah, I really like that. It almost takes all of the emotion out of it by making it super factual, and also maybe by doing the boundary stuff, you're lowering the expectation so it's not as scary almost. I did an episode on this too, which was on defiance and saying no.
Ah,
And I think boundaries feel a bit ick sometimes if you shame spiral off the back of it.
yeah.
If you're like, I'm not enough, and by someone saying no, the rejection, it goes into the wrong way rather than sort of no being liberating. Because if you can't get support from one person, at least that's quite clear, and then you can go to the next person. It doesn't mean that that person can't support you in other things. It might actually just be that sort of one thing, you know?
And that's a great example with the me part of it. When you're setting that boundary with yourself, no matter what the answer is, it's not about me. It's not a negative, referendum on who I am as a person.
So social structures and obviously social connection crucial for living a great life, living a bountiful life, living a long life, longevity health span. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do with people to make sure that they have the right social support, social structures, and what that maybe looks like?
Yeah. So first of all, you cannot work with us unless you have a person who's going with you through the process, not as an accountability partner, but that someone is there to remind you of the process as you have gone on. Because we're not going to be in your life forever, but your people in your community, they will. And so what we have seen from this example, this one person is now your cheerleader and has created community around you by sharing what's happening, with you with other groups and other conversations. So now this two group of individuals now become three, now become four, because when people feel good, they're going to share their news. And a community then is derived from that, no matter where you are. One of our other programs that we've created is called the Just Beginning Dinner Circles. There is no better way to commune over conversation, whether you're grieving, whether you're in joy, whether you're in excitement, it's in between period, than sharing a meal with somebody. You can even, from your garden, I'm sure, collecting the harvest from the garden and preparing a meal with folks. And so it's 8 to 10 groups, and no one needs to work with us to do this, but 8 to 10 folks who are going through a weekly process where you have themes throughout the week in your next life chapter that you want to talk about, and you're doing it over a meal. Imagine what that could be like, especially if it's in more purposeful in senior living quarters, or if someone who is hosting groups with their friends, but having a little bit more intentional so that conversation can be there. And you go through this 8 to 10 week process, then you cycle on to another, group of conversations. And so we give them thematic conversation pointers to start to be able to connect with people. And pretty soon our hope is, imagine cross-culturally. If you're in the same time zone as someone in the UK and wherever else, what if you were to do that with a big community, even over Zoom, for instance?
My dad, actually, when he got divorced and before he died, I think he's about 44, and he started going to these tables of 6. And, it's hard to make friends as an adult. The older you get, I feel like it is hard. And he went to these tables of 6, and he met a lady and, met a whole bunch of other people. And I really love that idea of just going, no agenda, really, just going and meeting people and seeing what comes up through connection of food, and maybe just having some conviviality.
Yeah.
This is a tough one, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Sure.
What happens to someone emotionally when they feel replaced or invisible after leaving the workforce? And maybe what would you say to those people if they're in that situation?
Yeah. What you don't see in the pilot was, and I say this to Sandy, just 9 months. They couldn't let you stay on for just 9 months. Sandy was let go from her position before she can collect retirement. And she only needed 9 months to fulfill her full retirement with what she was guaranteed. She's sitting in the lobby of the hospital because she was a medical technologist. They had just let her go. And she's just crying and things like that. I asked her, what was she feeling? Betrayal, like she was replaced. What did that moment teach you about the life that you had, the life that you're currently in, and what do you want to feel on the other side of that? Because I think if we just focus so much on just sitting with it, and it's important to sit with the pain. the betrayal of being replaced and feeling invisible. But what do you want to feel on the other side of that? And when you're ready, what are those steps that you can take to support you in doing that? We've all felt replaced and invisible at one point or another in our lives. Somehow we got over that. What did you do then? Because a lot of times there and then is lodged in the here and now. There are steps that you can take to actually get your way over to the other side.
What have older adults taught you about joy, strength, and identity?
Joy, that it needs to be a everyday, intentional practice in one's life. Strength, the baby boomer generation is one of the most agile and resilient generations ever. They have gone through so many different movements. Their lives and decades have changed drastically. Having the courage and the agility to go through all that and to still be standing, the strength that that takes, it is nothing but remarkable. Identity, every day they have taught me, every day I need to ask myself, what is the identity that I am living, that I'm perpetuating, and that I need to release?
Why do you believe it's so important to heal our past in order to live a bountiful retirement?
I think it's the only way to authentically be fully present and grateful for all of your lived experiences. And from what I'm seeing, especially at one's latter stages of life, to not have any regrets, to feel that you did all that you possibly could within your strength.
Yeah, great. Quick fire round.
Sure.
What, in your opinion, is the most underrated fruit or vegetable?
Fruit or vegetable, a kiwi.
What's your favorite cocktail?
Oh, champagne with a little bit of Saint Germain with a lemon twist, and the lemon twist has to be smoked.
Oh, very specific.
Delicious.
Worst meal that your parents ever made you eat?
Liver.
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah.
What word describes your life?
Transformational.
What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? Having the courage to follow my life calling and purpose for as long as I have.
Following the courage to follow your crazy dream with the AI version of your grandparents. Love it. I say that like as a term of endearment. Any tenets or principles that you live by?
There's only plan A.
Love that. What's one thing that's really mattered in your life that you didn't realize mattered as much at the time?
My mother setting me up for the life that I've had, even though me moving to New York with $500 and having this crazy entrepreneurial thing has not been what she wanted for me. But had she not set me up and nurtured my gifts and my talents at a very young age, I'm talking about like 4th grade, 3rd grade, remembering being, a masterful orator, and her positioning me doing those kind of things, making sure I went on study abroad, even though I didn't want to go, and like literally pushing me to be my very best.
What's something that you thought mattered but realized it didn't?
Money. And not the value of money, but I was taught, which I had to unlearn, that you're only as valuable as the money that you make, not what you do.
What's one thing in your toolkit for when you're having a hard day or a tough season?
Cleo Soul, the artist.
Okay.
She's
Music.
from the UK, love her, yeah.
And what brings you joy?
Connecting. These kind of conversations, I love it, and it brings me the most joy.
What is the last thing that you would like to say to the bountiful audience, to your own community about this topic?
We're still in the early stages of this. The UK and Japan, they have a minister of loneliness because it's now an epidemic, especially not only for younger people, but in particular demographics are women and older adults. And because it's such an early conversation, don't have any shame around saying, I feel this way as a baby boomer or as a whatever generation, you are from. it really is something that we're just starting to see a little bit of a door opening for, and what purpose means and things like that. And so I just hope, especially around with that older adult conversation reinvention, that people would start not to have so much shame around speaking on it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Klay, for joining us and for all of your wisdom and amazing coaching prowess. I think the work you're doing is really important, and I am really excited that we shared some of your wisdom with the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.